Maybe I should play some ukulele music or something. You know, this is the sort of the photo ukulele sound.
Can you just be playing that while I edit? It might make things more bearable.
I don't know any songs about photography.
Just that vibe would be great. I'm going to have you do that every time I edit.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Welcome, everybody, to the ACE Electronic Media and Photography Learning Community Professional Development Webinar. My name is Jeff Heino. I'm the chair of the EMPLC. And with me today, I've got Scott Stebner from Kansas State University. And Scott's going to be taking us on a great journey into some places I know I would look forward to being, which is to find out more about some advanced photo editing techniques. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott. Scott, welcome. And what have you got to share with us today?
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and all of you guys tuning in. Really excited to be doing this, and just kind of setting the tone for what we'll go over today. I will be spending, the whole time in Capture One. I know some of you probably aren't familiar with that. And Photoshop. So I'm just going to be taking you through some images. Jeff is going to be serving as moderator. This is a topic where there can be lots of questions. And some of the basic things I'm not going to be explaining. I am really going to be getting into some of the advanced things that I do. Do you have questions? Type them in the chat box, and Jeff will kind of ask them to me as we go. But yeah, I'm excited, and I can't wait to do this. Just some quick things, too, that I wanted to talk about is kind of my approach to editing, what I do with that, briefly talk about my gear, just because everyone always asks about the gear, and then get into the nuts and the bolts. Let me see real quick. All right, can you see the website, Jeff?
Yes, we're seeing your ag photographer. Yep.
Great, yeah, and I just kind of wanted to walk you through this mainly to show you what I do. I am an agricultural photographer. I do pretty much everything on location. I do some studio stuff as well. So walking you through some things, hopefully you'll be able to see the style that I go for. I try for something that what I call cinematic. I get really inspired by movies. I watch a lot of different shows, TV shows, taking screenshots, and really trying to reverse engineer their lighting, but also edit it that way as well. So going through some of my images just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going to be. And then shameless plug of the day, these images are part of a book that I wrote last year in photograph called Kansas Farmer. And the only reason I promote this is all profits, every dime goes to scholarships for students at K-State University who are interested in advocacy for the industry. So you can get there by my website if you are interested in supporting some students and some great scholarships. So let's kind of get into some things real quick before I get there. Cameras, like I said, people always ask this when you go into editing. I do shoot with a medium format camera with a 40 megapixel back. These are unique. The reason I bring this up is people ask about the depth of field that I get all the time. And that's not something I get in post-production. It's just kind of a factor of the camera that I use. Some of the other things that are really, really important to editing for me is a calibrated monitor. If you don't have a calibrated monitor, highly, highly recommend it. There are tons of options out there. I use the X-Rite Color Display Pro. Spiders work great. The reason I like the Pro is when I work with ad executives or magazines, I can actually install their color profile for the ink that their printer is going to be using and set that to my monitor, and this does a great job calibrating it. I take this wherever I go, so if I'm editing at home, whether I'm in a horrible hotel room or a Starbucks, I know wherever I go that this is going to be making sure my monitor is accurate. And then I'll be editing with a Wacom tablet, some of this stuff as well when I get into Photoshop. I love the Wacom tablet. I get a little rusty at it sometimes. If you are looking at purchasing a Wacom tablet though, iPad just revolutionized everything with the iPad Pro, and you actually can use your iPad Pro to sync up to your computer and edit right on your iPad Pro. And the great thing is, since it's Bluetooth, Your computer can be downstairs and you can be working on your computer, editing photos with a tablet upstairs as you watch TV or hang out with family, you name it. So that's some great things. All right. So getting into this, just kind of wanted to share a little bit about my RAW conversion. I know most people use Lightroom. I've used Lightroom ever since it was the beginning, really. Since it came out, that first month I purchased it and I've used it. I love Lightroom. If I'm working on 1,000 images in a single setting, trying to edit all those really quickly, I use Lightroom. It's really quick, really organized, but there's some other powerful programs out there, and this is Capture One. Capture One, super powerful, really crisp, medium format, and we do have some audio going on, by the way. Sorry. Shoot medium format, and so I want to get all the power I can out of it, and the file quality that you get from Capture One is a lot better than Lightroom. The contrast, the detail, we've done side-by-side comparisons, and it's pretty incredible the difference between the two. It is pretty expensive, but it's still great. All right. And another thing is when I go through these image processing in Capture One, I know this is a new tool set, but I want to say this is exactly the same thing as Lightroom. So what I do here, you can do in Lightroom. So when I say bump the shadows, you can bump the shadows in Lightroom. I'm using a different tool to do it, but it'll get you there as well. So I'll talk through it. So what are we going to be doing today? My philosophy, get it right in camera. I use off-camera flash a lot. I try to get it as perfectly as I can, and then I go from there. So, for example, let's look at some before and afters, and I'm going to select 3 of these images to really kind of show you where we go. These are straight out of camera, no editing, and then you'll see the next edited version here. So that's a before and an after. Going through some more. And you can see that I add a lot of different elements to it. I am not a photojournalist. I think that's a big thing I need to state up front. I used to work as a photojournalist. Obviously, a lot of what I do would be unethical from a news standpoint. I'm a commercial photographer, so I really try to make a good image whether or not it was realistic. But I do try to get it as close as possible, from straight out of camera to fully edited, straight out of camera to fully edited. And so I try to give myself as much chance for success as I can. But sometimes things are outside the realm of possibility for what reality allows me to get. The sun had gone down, we didn't have any light. For this shoot here of a backpacking shoot I did, so we can create our own light. Also, I love drama, so if there aren't any clouds in there, I'm fine adding some clouds in there. So I'll go through deconstructing this image as well. And then also we do a fair amount of studio work, so I try to just get it as similar as I can to where we're going to go. So these are some of the images that I'm going to be working on. I'm going to take you through Capture One, same thing as Lightroom, and then I'll take these through Photoshop. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask Jeff, and he will relay these. So these are some of the images that I'm going to be working on today. I shoot in RAW format. I never, ever shoot in JPEG anymore. I know that's a big thing with editing. People say, yeah, get it right in camera with JPEG. Well, RAW just gives me so much detail. It allows me to do so much that I only shoot in RAW. And I'm not taking 500 pictures of a shoot. I show up to a commercial shoot, I take 30 pictures maybe. So RAW works fine with me. Storage is cheap. I'm not concerned about storage. I just want the best file possible. So we're going to be looking at these 4 images today. So anyone, by the way, heard of Capture One? You can just type it into the chat room. And I'm going to walk you through this as well. How many of you use Lightroom? You can just type in Lightroom to the chat room, and Jeff can relay that information to me. All right. So I'm going to walk you through step by step what I'm going to do to these images. Once again, I'm not going to go through the basics here, but this is an advanced editing class. So I'm really just going to go through my ideas, my philosophy, and my approach to doing this. This is a picture that turned out about perfectly in camera. But when I'm looking at this, there's some things that I want to do. I do not like that the highlights are the same exact tonal range as his face. So I want to make sure I can bring some drama into this sky. I also want more contrast between the bright of the sky and the dark of the shadows. And I also want to create some separation between this grass right here and his chaps, and especially with his shirt and his horse as well. So what I'm going to be doing with this image is really just trying to create some contrast in the tonal range between the shadows and highlights, but also between color ranges as well. So just like in Lightroom, I have my exposure. And I love dark, moody images. And so I'm just going to bring this down till I think we're about there. In general, whether it's Lightroom or Capture One or Photoshop, I never ever touch the contrast button. There's much better ways to do contrast. Never touch the contrast button. Same thing with brightness. I never ever touch the brightness button. And I never touch the saturation button. Saturation, I kind of refer to it as allspice. You just throw it all on there and it applies everything that it can. Instead, I'd like to add little bits and pieces at a time, so I never use saturation. Well, if I bump up saturation, it does the oranges, it does the blues, and it does the greens. I do not want that. I just am going to get specific colors. So when I want to boost saturation, I'm only going to be looking at greens, blues, you name it. Now, I messed up here and I blew out the highlights. So the highlights right here, Lightroom has a slider, just like Capture One, to bring down the highlights. So I'm just going to bring the highlights to how I want it. And bring up a little bit of shadows as well. So you can see before and after. Really quick. And this image does look a little flat, and that's fine with me. I like more of a painterly look, kind of going back to some of those Dutch masters. So I kind of produce a flat image in RAW, and then I tweak it a little bit as I go to Photoshop. Levels are fine. What I do with curves is I'm going to add just a little bit of contrast in here. Now, when I was really new to curves, especially with Photoshop or Lightroom or you name it, I would just click here and just kind of hope that I was going to get something right and just move across there. There are better ways of doing it. So Lightroom, Photoshop, and Capture One all have this little color dropper right here. So if I click on this, and let's say I just want to boost his face. Not sure why this is doing it right now. Well, I can just pick a point. Well, technology rules, I'll show this in Photoshop too. I can actually pick a point and have it only go through what I want it to do. For example, if you can see right here, this orange line that's moving across, that is showing me where his skin tone is. So I can just kind of guesstimate as well that right down here is where I want to increase just the skin tone. Clarity is just kind of a punch to it. I don't go above 10 ever on clarity, but if I went all the way, you can kind of see what happens to it. But about 10 seems to be that golden rule. For landscapes, you can get away with 20. And I'm just going to go through and add a little vignette to this one. Great. Next thing, and to be honest, this is all I would do in my raw conversion here. So pretty simple basic steps. I spend majority of my time in Photoshop. Now let's get, any questions so far, Jeff?
Nope. We have
all right, the magic is
from the Lightroom. Two.
Okay,
two
great. We're going to get into the magic of Photoshop in about 10 minutes. Let's get to this really big problem image that we're going to work through. This is right out of camera. So I'm looking at this, it's really dark, really not much to it. But the great thing is, once again, I can bring up our shadows quite considerably. Like I said, I'm going to spend very little time in Capture One. We're going to spend almost all of our time in Photoshop. So very little that we're doing at this step. This image, I lost the raw file. We'll show you how we're going to do this in Photoshop. And lastly, this portrait of a bull rider for the PBR. I'm just going to bring up my shadows here. And one thing that any raw conversion program is going to let you do is offer fine adjustments. So for example, Photoshop Raw can do this. Lightroom has adjustment brushes, and that's what we're going to do here. And I'm just going to quickly add some detail into my shadows just to bring out his rope and his chaps. All right. I know this is quick, but I wanted to talk mostly about Photoshop because that's what we talked about here. So I'm just going to get these into Photoshop, and now we're going to get into the gritty details. When you go from Lightroom or any raw conversion program to Photoshop, always do a TIFF or a PSD file. Never do a JPEG if you're concerned about photo quality. Every time you open up a JPEG, the file quality starts to diminish, so that's big. Profile, work in RGB, never work in sRGB. I export, for example, to web to sRGB, but always choose RGB or Pro RGB, but I just choose RGB. So export in TIFFs, always work in RGB, and now we're ready for the fun to happen. Just wanted to show you these raw images really quick before we move on. All right, these should be popping up in just a second, and now we can kind of work through this. So we're going to start on just a basic image. Let's get this bull rider up here. Okay, so here's where things start. And I want to say these three things I do every single possible image that I do. For those of you who are familiar with Photoshop, I never ever work with these adjustments here. I always work on non-destructive editing techniques. So I never touch the base layer, and I never use the image adjustments. With that, I always want to make sure I'm never touching my base image. The first thing I'm going to do is image, and then I'm going to copy. So Command J for a Mac, and I'm just going to copy this image. I can even hide this one if I want. But this way, I make sure that nothing is ever done to my real image. So I mentioned earlier that I really love some of those painterly looks you get in the Dutch master series of these oil paintings. And a lot of what you see that distinguishes their stuff is not only their light and their Rembrandt lighting, which is what I'm trying to show here, but in the tonal ranges. And most of the time, to get that in a DSLR, you have to do some work to it. So the very first thing I always do to my images, whether it's inside, outside, you name it, is I go down to my adjustment layers. Once again, this is more for kind of advanced photo techniques. I'm not going to get too much into what adjustment layers are, but essentially what these are is they're ways to editing a picture that don't destroy it. It's non-editing. I'm putting an adjustment on top of my layer. So the very first thing I do is I'm going to go to my channel mixer. And this brings up all of my RGB values, my red, my green, my blue, and my tone. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click monochrome. And hang with me for a second because this is going to make it black and white. And now I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to change my blue, green, and red color values. You can change any number that you want, but the big thing here is you never go above 100%. So these three numbers can never be above 100%. In general, what I find to do is 80% blue, 20% green, and 0% red. The blue generally stays the same at 80. Some images I'll boost reds, or some images I'll boost green. But I would say 90% of the time, this is the formula I have. For those of you who like presets, I actually have a custom preset I've made that does the same thing. Well, now we've made this image black and white. I don't want a black and white image. So for those of you familiar with opacity, opacity is simply the amount of strength that is applied to something. So this is 100% opacity on a black and white conversion. I can go down to 0. I find the sweet spot for what I want to do between 15 to 20% opacity. Sometimes I'll go up a little higher. But you can see that's a very subtle change if I click this off and I click it on. And specifically what you're going to see is it settles out the transition between the shadows and the highlights, and it kind of compresses everything. So this is the first thing that I do. The next thing I do in all of my portraits is I go to a curves adjustment now. And now I'm going to build in a little bit of contrast. Some people ask, why didn't you do this earlier when it was in RAW? Well, I've just kind of found out the quality of photo I get is a lot better if I build almost a flat image first and do these minor tweaks in Photoshop. So I'm going to go through curves, and I'm going to build a little contrast. Now, this should work when I was talking about being able to isolate specifically tonal ranges that I want to do. I could just try to increase and decrease this and guess. The great thing about Photoshop is I can click on this little hand here, and I can click, and it'll show me exactly where that tone is. And now I can increase or decrease this tone, specifically targeting that. But one thing that I don't like is it's also bringing up the shadows. As you can see down here, as I move this up, the whole graph moves up and down. So using this pointer tool, I can say, I want to adjust this little tone on his cheek, but let's say I want to keep my detail in my shadows. I'm just going to click right there, and now you can see the shadows are protected, and I'm just increasing some of those tones. So you can see right there. So where we've been so far, I added my channel mixer, which was a black and white conversion at 20% opacity, and then I added my curves. The next thing I always do is my color grade, and this is where we kind of get that cinematic look to things. If you ever look at the movies, and my favorite TV show right now is House of Cards, their color grading is amazing, and their lighting is amazing. Color grading is what people do to the color tones of the image. Now, usually when you ask people what contrast is, they'll tell you it's the difference between highlights and shadows, and that is definitely true. But I think there's another form of contrast besides highlights and shadows. We're also looking at contrasting color tones. So for example, in the RGB values, where you'd have a red and a blue, or yellow and or blue and orange and so forth. So that's one of the things that I'm going to try to do, is I'm going to build some contrast using colors. To do that, I go down here to an adjustment layer as well. Once again, we never work on the original image. And I'm going to press curves. Now, if you see right here, if I try to move something, it's going to move everything. And that's because it says RGB right here, red, green, and blue. It's going to do all my values. Well, let's say I just want to change blues. I can select my blue. And for those of you who aren't familiar with histograms, anything on the bottom, this side, is a shadow. Everything over here is a highlight. So what I can do is, let's say I want to add blue into my shadows. I can pull this up. And if I want to add the opposite of blue, which would be yellow, I can pull it down. I can also go into my greens, push the greens up, or push the greens down, and you'll get a magenta. Same thing with reds. I can increase reds, or I can decrease reds and get cyan. That's the opposite of it. So one thing that I can do is I can try to say, let's say I want to do my blue curves. Add some shadow detail that is blue. Well, just like our RGB value, we have bumped up all of the blues. I can come back here to my pointer, figure out where his skin tones are, and say, nope, I don't want to make that blue. And now I have a point right here where his skin tone is, and I can drag that down. Let's say I want to add a little cyan to this. So I'm going to bring my reds down. But as you can see, it's also making his cheek right here a little cyan, and same here. So I'm just going to click and move up. So you can see without and with, it's just a little bit of drama. There's a lot of different things you can do with this. You can also build your own presets. And so I want to show you a preset I built for this specific shoot. I know there's a lot of greens in there, but let's take a look at what we're doing. I pushed and pulled all of these curves until I get something that I like. You can see how it kind of affects his cheek right there. Same with the greens, and the same with the blues. Feel free to ask questions as you'd like, because I know we're getting something pretty complex right now as we're building a case for this.
Hey, Scott, this is Jeff.
Yeah.
Got a question for you.
Yeah.
Back when you were adjusting the channels, you were moving pretty quick.
Okay.
How you set the RGB at. Can you go through that one more time?
Sure, and thank you for that. Blue, let's remove this here. So 80% blue, and you can see how it kind of affect the image right here. 20% green, and 0% red. Now you can see what happens if I go above 100%, the image is actually, it's starting to add what isn't there, and it's going to start destroying the file. So as long as your RGB add up to 100%, you're going to be fine. And you can see at the bottom right here, if I go above 100%, it'll show me. Never go into the negative as well. But in general, 80% blue, 20% green, 0% red. And thanks for letting me know I was going a little too fast. All right. So now we have our colors, and I'm going to get into one of the outside images in just a second. One of the things that I've noticed is no matter how hard I try to protect everything, you still see right in here some saturation with this image. I've added greens and oranges to his skin tone, and I don't want to see him look jaundiced. I have no idea why this trick works. All I know is it does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure what is shown here only ends up in the shadows. Once again, this is a do as I say. I don't know why it works. It was just shown to me, and this is how we make it work. I have this colors that I've done, and let's say, for example, you're in a wheat field, and you photographed a wheat field, and you've added a bunch of orange to make the wheat look really good. Well, you don't want that orange affecting the sky. You just want it affecting the shadows of the wheat. Here's how you make it just affect the shadows. This color grade. You're going to go to Image, right up here. No idea why this works. I just know it does. You're going to go to Apply Image, and you're going to see it's going to completely go away. Leave everything here the same. Don't touch it, and you're going to click Invert. And now what has happened is I've only made it hit into the shadows. So just kind of going where we've come from. This is basic raw conversion. I added my painterly effect, which was my channel mixer. 80% green, or 80% blue, 20% green, 0% red. I introduced a few curve adjustments to build in some contrast. You can see this is my curve adjustment right here, basic S curve, where I brought down the shadows and increased the highlights. And lastly, I used curves, especially the colors, to add a little drama into this. All right, now we're ready for our dodge and burn, and this image will be complete. Once again, I'm never going to work on this base layer. I'm going to go through and select every single one of these layers by clicking on the bottom to the top, and then I'm merging all. And for you Mac users, that is Shift, Option, Command, E. For you PC users, I don't understand you, but just look at Merge All. I'm going to go through and do a sharpening adjustment now. Now, this was a single thing that probably helped my career out the most, was learning how to sharpen. Most people go through and use the sharpen mask or unsharpen. I don't like any of those. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a high pass filter. So it's going to look really crazy for a second, but I'm going to deconstruct this and we're going to walk through it. To do your sharpening, and let's just make this layer sharpening. You're going to go up here to Filter. You're going to go to Other. And then you're going to choose High Pass Filter. And we're going to click on it. Now it's going to look really crazy for a second. And you can see it's a bunch of gray with some outlines to it. Your goal of this high pass filter, and I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see a little more, is you're going to make it to where you can only see the outline of his jawbone, his hat, some of the fine details. This will not look good if you can see individual pores or anything like that. So what I do is I start at 0, and I slowly start increasing it to the right, and I use till I just start to see some details emerge. I kind of liken this back into the old darkroom days where you'd see this image emerge before you. So I usually find out about 4 to 5 is appropriate. So you can see right about there, I can see his cheek, I can see his mouth, his nose, his eyes. I can see some pores though, so that's probably a little too much. And I'm just going to back off and hit OK. Well, now the image looks horrible, right? Well, there are things called blending modes or layer modes. To get there, we're going to go up here to where it says Normal under our Layers button. We're going to click on it. Now, there's 2 specific options that we have. We have Overlay and Soft Light. And what Overlay and Soft Light do is they punch a hole through anything that is gray. And our background right now is gray. In terms of strength, what you could say is Overlay is strong. Soft Light is half as strong as Overlay for this effect. So I'm going to click Overlay and show you what it does. So here is it with the sharpening off. Here's it with the sharpening on. Now, I rarely use Overlay. I prefer Soft Light and the Soft Light option. So once again, Soft Light is half as strong as Overlay. So you can just see this is zoomed into 100%. It's very subtle. Now, why do I like this? Well, if I was just to hit Unsharp Mask, it would also sharpen his pores. I know there's a lot of different things we can do with that. I can target this a lot better through, once again, my high pass filter. So that is a sharpen. I'm going to go through again, select everything, hold down Shift, click the bottom layer, merge all, Shift, Option, Command E, and now I have another layer. Lastly, it's time to dodge and burn, and this image will be complete. I never ever touch these dodge and burn tools. What happens is it eventually just kind of ruins the image. This is a destructive editing tool. And you can see one of the things with dodge and burn is it also affects the color quality that you get. So I never use dodge and burn at all. Once again, if we were to go here to mid-tones, it'll eventually make this a brown mess. So how do I dodge and burn? Well, I can either use a layer adjustment, but I prefer to do something else. What I'm going to do for dodging and burning is I'm going to go up here to Layer, New, and just going to do a new layer. And now it gives me a few options, and I'm going to name this my dodge layer. And for mode, what we're going to do is we're going to choose Overlay. And lastly, with your dodge layer named, your mode being Overlay, set to 100% opacity, you're going to click Fill Overlay Neutral Color with 50% gray. And I'm going to do this one more time. Layer, New, Layer. And I'm going to name this Burn. Overlay, Fill with 50% gray. Now here's a great thing with this. Now all I have to do to dodge and burn is I paint with black on my burn layer, or I paint with white on my dodge layer. Now when you do this, it's really important that you don't set everything to 100% opacity and 100% flow. And let me tell you why. Let's pick a horrendous color. If I just go 100%, it's either all on or all off. If I go low on my opacity and high on my flow, it is all the same strength no matter if I go over it again or not. what I'm going to do is I can choose 100% opacity, and let's say 10% flow. And what this allows me to do now is it's subtle, but the great thing is it allows me to build on itself now. So let me choose this spot here, and just by going over it again, I can really add some gentle strokes and focus on areas that I really want concern on and less on others. So let's get rid of this. So how does this work? On my dodge layer, once again, I paint white on my dodge layer to dodge. 100% opacity, 10% flow. And so let's go through here, and I just want to brighten this up. And that might be too much, so let me go down to, let's say, 50%. I want to boost over here. And you can notice if I was just dodging and burning, this would be destructive. It would start to lose its tonal colors. And let's dodge a little bit in there. But since I'm just painting white on this, I'm not destructing anything at all. I am just going through and brightening things. Now let's say I want to burn this down a little bit. I don't like how his hand tone is different from his face tone. I'm going to go down to my burn layer, and I'm going to switch this to black. Quick little tip, by the way, if you hit the X button, you can switch between your two colors. So let's say I want to go through, and I'm just going to burn this down now. And that was a little too strong. And if you mess up, by the way, on this layer, instead of painting on black, you can remove it by painting with white over that. Let's say I want to go into his eyes. We're going to go back to our dodge channel. I'm on black. There we go. Oh, you can see me in his eyes. There we go. All right. There we go. So let's deconstruct this real quick. I'm just making these layers invisible. First step is I did a channel mixer, 80% green, or 80% blue, 20% green. I added my curves adjustment. I added my color grade. I sharpened using a high pass filter. Then I duplicated a layer. Now I'm dodging with an overlay layer, once again set to 50%. I burned, and now we're good to go. So let's say we want to publish this photo to Facebook, and we are absolutely tired of how Facebook makes all of our images look horrible. Well, there's a little trick around Facebook. And just to keep everything easy, I'm going to go through and I'm going to flatten this image. Normally I would save it, but just to keep it easy, I'm going to show you how to get past Facebook's horrible filter they add to it. The problem with Facebook is they get billions of photos every single week uploaded to Facebook every day, and they have a space issue, so they compress it. Anything over a certain file size, they end up compressing. So the easiest way to do this is you're going to go to Image, Image Size. Make sure Resample Image is set, and this is only for publishing to Facebook, by the way. You want to make sure your longest edge, so the longest edge by pixel, is 2048. 2070, Facebook's going to compress it. 3000, Facebook's going to compress it. For some reason, 2048 on the long edge, make sure it's super sharp for Facebook. So we're going to hit OK. And lastly, we're going to hit Save for Web. File, Save for Web. Make sure that the quality is set at 80%. And make sure down here for this quality, you're set to biqubit smoother. And save. And I guarantee you, try to do this, run a little test on your Facebook. These photos will appear much sharper than any of the other ones. So that is how you get by Facebook. Any questions on resizing for Facebook?
Feel free to type in the chat box, folks.
All right. So let's go quickly to adding some quick clouds to this image here. I'm going to go through and do my basic adjustments again. Channel mixer, monochrome, 80% green, or 80% blue, that's where I'm colorblind, 20% green, 0% red, and I'm just going to go to about 15%. All right, I want to build some contrast. I'm going to make another layers adjustment at curves. And let's say I want to boost his tone on this cheek right here, but I want to lower the tone on his jeans right here. So I'm going to click on each one, and Photoshop's going to show me that to get his jeans darker and his face lighter, I'm going to do that. There we go. Once again, I'm going to do my curves adjustment for my color grade. I want to introduce maybe some blues in here into the shadows. So let's go to curves. Once again, don't click on the RGB value. I'm going to click on reds because I want to introduce cyans into my shadows. Now I know this is a red color chart, but if I remove reds by dragging down, I can make sure that I introduce cyan to my shadows. Now, once again, this introduced blue into his skin tones. So I'm going to go through and make sure that this color only goes to the shadows. Image, apply image, click invert, and there we go. All right, so now I absolutely hate the sky on this. I love clouds, I love drama, and so one of the things I do is I always take my camera with me, and I make sure that I always take pictures of clouds. So I have this picture of a cloud right here. This is taken out of my backyard. And I'm just going to copy this over, select all. So select all, copy. And now I'm going to go through and hit paste. So now we have clouds on top of here. And I'm just going to make sure this layer can't be seen, so I'm going to unmark it. Now there's a few things I could do. I need to select him out of the background. What I'm going to do for this is I'm simply just going to go through and hit select, color range, and I'm not going to use this eyedropper here. I'm going to use this plus dropper and start with the fuzziness down at the very bottom. Real quick, hold on. Okay. And someone might ask, why aren't you using the magic wand tool? Well, that works, and I might have to use it in this one. But I tend to find that this one is a little more appropriate, but it looks like I'm going to have to use the magic wand for this. So magic wand's great. It's really quick. So I'm just going to click here on a color range that I want sampled. And one of the things, if you're not familiar with doing this technique, is if you need to add more to it, hit the shift button and you can keep adding it. So you can see shift, click, and we should be all right. And let's say, for example, I wanted to add some of his hat. I can do shift, click, and I can add some of that. I'm just going to hit Control-Z for undo. And there we go. So now I have that area selected where I know it's not going to be impacting him at all. I go up here to my layer. And now the big thing is I don't want to just be working on this cloud layer. I want to be working in a non-destructive technique. So what I'm going to be doing is creating a group. And this group is going to allow me to move everything around that I could ever want. So I'm going to go up here to layer and just do a blank layer and hit OK. So now I'm going to go through and select both of these. And I'm going to go through and hit Command G for group. And he's still there, but what I can do is create a mask now from everything. So I can add a layer mask, so I can click that. And now we have something somewhat similar to what I'm looking for. The problem is this jagged little edge right here. Also, some things aren't really realistic about this because you can look out at the horizon. It usually gets a little hazy down at the bottom. Well, the great thing I can do is I want to reselect the clouds. So I can go up here to select and hit reselect. And I have a layer mask here. So for those of you familiar with layer masks, once again, advanced editing Photoshop, anything that's a white you can see shows up. Anything that's a black is hidden. So if I want to go through, let's say I get my brush real quick and I paint in black, you can, let me get a little higher dose on this. I'll remove anything with black. And painting on white will make it show up again. So I could go through and I could start painting here, but that's not going to be realistic. I want a very, very subtle effect to this. The other option for adding clouds is instead of a brush, you can choose your gradient tool, which is right here. I'm going to click my gradient. And there's a few options, but you always want a straight gradient tool. And I'm going to click on the bottom, drag up, and you'll see that this actually becomes somewhat realistic. And the very last thing I'm going to do is there's something called depth of field. And you can see his eyes are sharp, the cattle are blurry, but the clouds are sharp. And that's not good. So I need to blur the clouds just a little bit. So I go up here to filter, blur, and I usually like Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to find maybe a radius that gives a little blur to the clouds where it matches the blur over here on the trees. That was too much. And that is one of the basic ways that I do to add clouds to it. Now, for those of you who can really see, right in here in the trees, I've messed up a little bit. So once again, I know that painting black will get rid of that. And I'm just going to go to, like, let's say my brush at a 10% opacity, 10% flow. And I'm just going to start deleting that just a little bit. And if I keep going through it, it'll eventually go away. And it's going to keep that background area somewhat intact. So let's go through this real quick. What I did, we started with this image. Okay, I added my 80% red, 20% green, or 80% blue, 20% green, 0% red. Sorry, guys. Added some contrast. I added my color adjustments using my apply image. I added a sky with a layer mask. And next thing I'm going to do is sharpen my image. So I'm going to merge all, filter, other, high pass. We're going to move this up to where you can barely see him. Set the blending mode to soft light, and there we go. So I know that was a whirlwind, absolutely a whirlwind, and I probably should have stopped at that bull rider in terms of what we were doing. But let's go through and see if there's any questions people have.
Folks, if you'd like to ask a question in the chat box, or if you would like to unmute a mic if you wish at this time, that's fine. I have everybody muted, but I had a question for you, Scott. You set the red to 0, but I always heard that reds are like a powerful item in photography. How does it work?
And that's just a stylistic preference. So you can see a lot of my stuff is desaturated, that I really don't have a lot of vibrant colors. And if you want a little more vibrancy to it, that works. What I find out is by getting rid of the reds and using greens or using blues and greens instead, sorry, need more coffee. That just gives me a little more subtle transition between the highlights and the shadows. But really, it's up, that technique is there. You can use it however you want. But that is a really, really great tool to use.
Great. We did have a question. If there's time, if there's any other shorter questions, we'll take those. But someone asked you to go through that dodge and burn sequence again. Is there a way
Sure
to do
thing.
that, like the 1 minute version?
Yep. And like I said, using, hopefully this being a video will allow people to go through and go back. We're going to go through is you're going to create a new layer, new, call this one dodge. You're going to set your mode to overlay and fill with 50% gray. You're going to do the same thing with burn. But just to show you, for dodge, you're going to paint white over the image. So I'm going to set these to 100% just to show. And anything you paint with white is going to brighten. Anything you paint with black is going to darken. Now that was obviously way too much. So what I do is I set it to about, let's say 15 and 15. So I can go through and just lighten those specific areas. This is a non-destructive editing technique. Once again, never, ever, 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 ever use dodge and burn. This is a much more powerful, much more precise way of going about it, and allows you to really, really gently do all of this stuff. So let's say I want to get these clouds up here. You can also do it on one layer, but I usually prefer to do 2 layers, one for dodge, one for burn. So I'm just going through, once again, painting white on the areas that, let's say we can make a little sun coming down on him. Here we go. So you can kind of see what we did there. But once again, new layer, set it to overlay, fill it 50% gray, and paint with white or black. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing one in the chat box, but I have another one.
Sure.
In the whole mental process, the artistic perspective you took, you mentioned using sort of the classic sort of painter. Who was it referred to? Rembrandt?
Rembrandt.
In other words, you had there was some method behind your madness, right? You had a concept in mind, and I thought that was interesting. That you just didn't do this willy and nilly. You had a specific kind of style in mind. And I imagine, would that style change depending on your topic and audience?
It really does, but overall, it stays pretty constant in that that's my style, that's what I like. So whether it's a bull rider here or a portrait of someone, or whether I'm working with cattle ranchers outdoors, I love how the Dutch masters lit things in their scenes, and it's absolutely beautiful. And so I try to light my scenes that way, whether it's natural light or strobe. But for my post-processing work, I really try to get that soft look to it.
That's great. Terrific. As Scott mentioned, this is being recorded and will be posted both on the ACE website under professional development, as well as on the eExtension Learn site that has, you can search and find this, and it will give you the address for the recording. A lot of information went by, and wow, good stuff.
Yeah, a lot of information, but once again, I hope that people can go through and hit play and pause during this video to kind of get through that. I know I went through it pretty quickly. Usually these edits, I can get an edit done in about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes by now, but that's kind of just going in autopilot, just going full speed ahead.
Great. Yeah, I could see where people could develop their own sort of style and approach, and by saving these presets, could move their editing along pretty quickly.
Yeah, and just to kind of go through everything again, that style that I do editing really comes down to that channel mixer that we started with, building contrast in the curves adjustment, and adding color through my color toning thing where I talked about breaking it down to each individual color, and then using apply image to put that into the shadows. Really, that's what I do on every single image that I do. And that's pretty much all I do. I use some plugins like Alien Skin or Vivisa, you name it. And those do help. But every single image I do gets that channel mixer, that contrast, that curves adjustment for color, and then that dodge and burn. And then I sharpen it using my overlay. Then I export it to Facebook at that size that we went over. And that really is my whole editing process.
So Scott, are there other sources of information about this kind of editing or related that folks might be able to dig deeper or get broader information about?
Yeah, I learned everything through YouTube. But
Everything I know, I learned on YouTube.
yeah, I've never taken a class. I just learned on YouTube. But there is a few people that are absolutely amazing. The first one is Phlearn, Phlearn.
Could you type that in the chat box? Type that in the chat box. That'll help.
Yeah. Okay. And what I can do is, I could pull it up, but he is a fine art photographer. And just letting you know, I wouldn't check his website from work, maybe. Check his YouTube channel, but maybe not his website. But go through and Phlearn, Aaron Nace. He does 10 to 15-minute tutorials. They are free. They're absolutely amazing. They put me to shame. Like 90% of the stuff I've learned is from him. So Phlearn is absolutely amazing. I'm trying to figure out how to put that into the chat box.
If you just go ahead and spell it, I'll put that in there for everyone here.
There we go.
Oh, there it is. Phlearn.
Landscapes, by the way, I do the same thing for landscapes. I just make them a little harsher, I guess. Feel free to email me, by the way. I love helping any way I can. For those who are in Kansas, I actually do monthly workshops on this stuff. People come to our studio and I do that. But email me. I'd love to help out any way I can. I love doing whatever we can to do to help our community out. So Phlearn.com is great. Creative.
Put your email in the chat box too.
I'll just start plugging Facebook.
People love that Facebook tip.
That alone, people all the time are like, hey, why do your images look so sharp? And I learned that from a guy named Joey L. Joey L is amazing. Joey L, by the way, L.com, has like a $19 tutorial on color grading, which is super cool too. And it is definitely worth the price as well. CreativeLive.com has classes you can buy, and you download them so they're yours. They're usually about $100. But feel free to email me, or if you're going to be at Ace, buy me a coffee in the morning. I'll sit down with you.
Great. I did have one last question, Scott. I'm not seeing else other than kudos and thank yous in the chat box. But in the photo of the hiker, I know we're not talking about lighting here, but you are a master lighter as well. How did you get that light on his face as he's marching with his hiking sticks? Is that a soft fill, or how did?
That is. I had a big 5-foot what we call octabox. It's like a softbox that I lit him with. And if anyone ever wants to learn how to do this, what I did to get that flare is I just added a lens flare to it. And that way I made it look like we had a lot of light. So going through,
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, feel free to email me. I love doing whatever I can. I think there's strength in building a community of retouchers, especially. This stuff started taking me hours, and then now it's really quick. And I think from here to here took me 5 minutes the other night.
Well, Scott, I want to say thank you so much for just a wonderful and very articulate presentation, step by step, with lots of review. And I know folks will probably pass this YouTube address along to others who will want to see this. And I do want to remind folks that this was brought to you by ACE, the Association for Communication Excellence, an organization that's dedicated to helping build professional skills in folks like Scott and myself and others that are with us today in becoming better communicators. So stay tuned for additional upcoming professional development opportunities from our electronic media and photography learning community. We have one scheduled to come up here. I believe it's going to be in May on at more advanced video editing. So stay tuned for lots more from Ace. Again, Scott, thank you so much. And I'll see you in Memphis, right?
Yep.
Fabulous. Okay, well, everyone, thank you very much. Again, watch for the recording. Will be posted on the Learn site as well as on the ACE website. With that, I wish everybody a pleasant remainder of the week. And Scott, thanks again.